Hello, everyone. My name is Kara. There's nothing as powerful as the unspoken. You never know where it will lead you one day. Unfortunately, my father and I had to experience it firsthand to realize this truth. As long as I can remember, I've always considered my father an indifferent and insensitive person. And it's no wonder. He has spent his whole life working as a policeman, so he has seen some crazy things in his life. My mother died when I was only 3 years old, so the only person who gave me love and care was my paternal grandmother. It was nearly impossible to have a heart-to-heart with my dad, especially when it came to my mother. He would always get irritated and refuse to talk about her. I loved looking through my mom's old pictures and family albums and trying to imagine what she was like. She had the most expressive eyes I've ever seen and a tiny spot above her lips. My grandma always used to say my mother had loved me to bits and that she had been a very good person. And I bet I would have never, ever learned more if I hadn't argued with my dad about my grades at school that morning. I would not have decided to take a walk in the park just to not have to go home. So I was walking along the road when I noticed a poorly dressed woman walking toward me. She passed by me very quickly, but I managed to see her face. It sent shivers up my spine. Those eyes and that spot above her lips. I knew it was impossible and that it was all probably a giant coincidence, but my legs just carried me and made me follow that woman. She walked out of the park and turned down some unknown street. Within a few blocks, she stopped near a supermarket, laid out a blanket on the ground, and sat down. I kept my distance, but I tried to get a better look at her face. I couldn't believe it, but that homeless woman looked very similar to my mother's pictures, just much older and crumpled. I don't know how long I was standing out there, but it was dark when I got back home. I immediately rushed to the living room and took out an old photo album. There were incredible pictures of my mom and dad's wedding day and of my mom and myself. I kept flipping through the pages, and I saw a photo of my mom, which, according to the date, was taken not long before her death. I could swear that it was that homeless woman looking at me from that photo. I took it out of the album and put it in my pocket. The next day after school, I headed straight to that supermarket. I had to wait for a couple of hours until that woman finally showed up and sat on her blanket. I plucked up all my courage and went up to her. She gave me a listless look and asked, "Do you have any change, young missy?" I mumbled a quiet no, but stayed where I was. She got annoyed and asked me what the hell I wanted then. I looked at my mother's picture and handed it to her. I saw the woman flinch as she looked at the photo, but she didn't say a word. Then I asked, "Is that you?" The woman quietly nodded and gave me the picture back. I caught my breath and said, I am Kara." She looked me up and down with interest and gave me a bitter smile. After an awkward pause, we fell into a casual conversation. I told her that I had always been told that she had died. I asked her to tell me the whole story, but she didn't want to talk about it. She also made me promise I would not tell my father about our meeting. I was overwhelmed with both happiness and anger on my way back home. My father had been lying to me all my life, and he probably made my grandma keep her mouth shut as well. But I kept my promise. When I opened the front door, I said hello to my dad, gritted my teeth, and headed straight to my room. From now on, I would go see my mother every day after school. We talked about everything, but when I tried to find out what had happened many years ago and how it had all come to this, she would always try to avoid answering me. But the more time we spent together, the more obvious my goal was becoming. I had to get my mom out of this no matter what it took. Winter was coming, so I brought her some of my warm clothes and food. I also gave her all my pocket money. She never asked me for anything, but was always very grateful for those little things. I felt I had to do more, so I started inventing ways to get more pocket money from my dad and my grandma. This still wasn't enough, so I began to steal it. I didn't feel ashamed, because I was sure I was doing it for a good cause. And I was pretty successful until one time my father finally caught me doing this stuff. He was a policeman after all. You can't even imagine how furious he was. He was screaming at me and telling me the most offensive things, so I broke down and told him everything. I called him a disgusting liar and threatened that I would leave home to live with my mother on the streets. My father went pale. He didn't say a word and quietly went to his room and shut the door. The following day, when I went to visit my mother, I saw a man talking to her. It was my father. He didn't look friendly at all. My mom was trying to say something, but he didn't even let her speak. Then he quickly turned around and left. I saw that she was crying. I headed to her immediately, but when she saw me, she suddenly jumped to her feet and ran away. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't manage to catch her. I was filled with rage and hatred, so I caught up with my father on the street and attacked him right there. I was yelling so loudly people were staring at us and pointing fingers, and my father was just there standing still, all stone-faced. He waited until I finished and said, "She is not who you think she is. She is the one who killed your mom," and walked away. I was standing there stunned in the middle of the street. I had nowhere else to go but to my grandma's house. When my grandmother heard the whole story, she burst into tears. I started begging her to finally tell me the truth. It was all I wanted. And soon she gave in. She went to her bedroom and came back with a photo. When I looked at it, I almost fell off my chair. There were 2 smiling girls in the picture, and both of them had the most expressive eyes I had ever seen and tiny spots above their lips. I couldn't believe my own eyes. My grandma pointed at one girl and said, "That is Jennifer, your mother, and that is Grace, her older sister." And then she told me everything I had been after for such a long time. It turned out that my mother and her sister Grace were very different. My mom had prospered in life. She was a good student and had a successful career afterward. Then she met a good guy, married him, and had a precious baby. She had me. And Grace had gone down a very dark path. She quit school when she was 15 and spent most of her time drinking and partying with her friends. But despite all this, my mother and sister remained close friends, and eventually my mom happened to be the only person in the world who tried to support and help Grace. Mom loved her sister with all her heart, but Grace wouldn't listen to her and kept on living the way she did until the time she suddenly started to feel really bad. She lost weight and couldn't get out of bed. She was diagnosed with late-stage liver cirrhosis. My mom would take her to the best doctors in the country, but the only way to save Grace's life was a liver transplant. And no matter how much my father tried to persuade her not to do it, my mom became a liver donor for her beloved sister. Grace survived and started feeling much better, but not my mom. She began to have bad health problems, and she was just wasting away to the point that the doctors couldn't manage to save her. However, this didn't stop Grace from drinking and having the same lifestyle she used to have before. Finally, she ended up on the streets. So my mother died for nothing. Her death was a heavy blow for my father. Grandma said he changed completely. He just threw himself into his work and became hard and heartless. And even an adorable child like me couldn't manage to melt his heart. This story just broke my heart. I was looking at the picture of my mother and Grace with tears streaming down my face. The reality was nothing I had expected, and I didn't know what to do with it now. I went back home and found my father sitting in his study all alone. He saw the picture in my hand and realized I had already learned the truth. He said he was sorry he hadn't told me anything before. He thought he would keep me safe if he didn't dredge up the past, but he actually broke my heart instead. He told me he had been helping Grace even after my mother had passed away, but she was a lost cause. Well, whatever it is, life goes on. Even though I know everything about my mother and Grace's past, I still turn down that street to the supermarket from time to time to check and see if Grace is there. But I've never seen her again. My dad says she hasn't contacted him either. We both are getting along much better now, by the way. This awful story brought us closer. We both now realize how important it is to listen to each other and discuss things in order to avoid those horrible misunderstandings. I hope you've never had to hear stories like that. But still, it might be cautionary for you. I would be glad to read your comments to find out what you think, and mark my words, Even a little white lie can kill you.